And let me know if you want me to begin.
Yeah, but I'm ready to roll. Let's get it. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. My name is Marino Bucci, and you're going to hear from Dr. Raphael. How do you pronounce your last name, Dr. Raphael? Cooey, Dr. Raphael Cooey, who's a PT, DBT, and he's received his doctorate of physical therapy degree from the University of Florida in 2018. Raphael had his first clinical internship at Kinetics and decided to return upon graduation after seeing firsthand the patient-focused care from the Kinetics family. So his competitive experience includes powerlifting, triathlon, boxing, and wrestling. He understands the importance of movement and is passionate about helping his patients return to doing what they love. He excels in the evaluation and treatment of orthopedic conditions for individuals of all levels, and he utilizes manual therapy techniques and corrective exercises to help patients achieve their goals. All right, and with that, Dr. Raphael Cooey.
Hey, how's it going, guys? So let me make sure that I'm good to go here. So thank you all for joining me this morning. So this is kind of like the money talk lecture. I titled it Post PT School Financial Considerations. I kind of created this lecture kind of geared towards either the new grad or the PT student getting ready to graduate, not really understanding what they're getting into in regards to finances, student loan repayment, and all the different options that go along with that. So we have a lot of information today. I'm gonna go through things relatively quickly. We'll kind of pause to answer any sort of questions, but I really want to blast through all of this information so you can kind of get through it. You should have access to all these slides. So if you do have any sort of follow-up questions and we're not able to get to it today, always feel free to shoot me an email. So quick legal disclaimer, of course, we're talking about money. This lecture isn't meant to be personalized financial advice. This information is only educational and hopefully entertaining. So the purpose of this lecture, as we talked about earlier, is to educate and bring awareness to the hurdles following PT school. If you're looking for specific financial advice, you want to go to a licensed professional for that. So objectives for today's presentation, we want to understand the differences between public and private student loans. We're going to review the anatomy of what student loans are and all the terms that go along with that. We'll want to go over the differences between loan consolidation versus refinancing. Those are two separate things. And then discerning the differences between the various student loan repayment options. We're specifically going to go over public student loan forgiveness and the inherent risks that are involved with that. We'll touch on how you create like a basic budget, and kind of the really more nuanced part of this lecture is going to be understanding retirement planning. So just the basic differences between what a Roth IRA is, or a 401k, or a traditional 401k. And if there's one thing that I want to highlight, there's one big takeaway that you come from this lecture is highlighting the power of compound interest and how relatively simple it is to accumulate $1 million by retirement. Very simple, very, very similar to exercise and nutrition. While it may be simple, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the easiest thing to do. It takes a lot of discipline. And finally, we just want to overall appreciate that personal finance is personal. A strategy that may work for one person may not necessarily work for you. So why am I talking to you guys about this? So it really comes down to personal lack of experience. After I graduated from PT school, I sort of realized I know how to treat patients at least an entry-level program. And I didn't really know anything about personal finance, how to deal with all this student loan debt that I took on. So basically a lack of education for many PTs up and coming. So the usual kind of plan for PTs is that they go to undergrad, maybe they're a APK major, a science-based thing. A lot of them go straight into PT school, then you're out into the real world. So unless someone has kind of sat down and talked to you about student loan repayment, personal finance, this is something that a lot of PTs never really get a lot of education on. And something to highlight is that financial burdens can be a slow burn, especially with student loans. You might not worry about it now or within 5 years, but that stress is going to build up just like the interest. So what do I know? Definitely not everything there is to know. So these are just some of the resources that I've taken in these past couple of years. I think it's important to highlight that in the beginning, I was really, really big on Dave Ramsey, and I think he still has a lot of good information to put out there. As I continue to learn more and my education of personal finance, retirement planning starts to evolve, I start to appreciate that it's not so black and white. So if you kind of know Dave Ramsey, he's all about getting out of debt as fast as possible, even at the consequence of not matching or not doing a 401k match. So later on in the lecture, we're going to highlight the risk involved with being hyper aggressive with student loan repayment, but missing out on that 401k match and how that can really affect you in the long run. So this is just an infographic from WebPT. I always like to highlight this, especially with the students that I have in my clinic. So 1 in 4 students are gonna have 150K in student loan debt, 1/3 100,000, then more than half $70,000 worth of student loan debt. As you guys know, 3/4 of students expect to earn $60,000 to $80,000 after they finish up PT school. And if you're tacking on like $100,000 plus of student loan debt, and this is your starting salary, we really have to figure out what's going to be the best game plan for you. This last little kind of note is the average DPT grad will take 45 years to be debt free. I think what they're talking about here is not just student loan debt, but also consumer debt. So we'll highlight the importance of a good defense to highlight proper offense when it comes to personal finance. So different types of student loans. Anytime you fill out that FAFSA form when you're in PT school or an undergrad, these are going to be public student loans. These are provided by the federal government. Congress sets these interest rates each year. So with public student loans or federal student loans, they have useful protections. We're going to talk about income-based repayment plans, loan forgiveness, whether it's the 20, 25-year loan forgiveness or the public student loan forgiveness, opportunities for forbearance, a lot of different types of things. So differences between subsidized and unsubsidized. If you have a subsidized student loan, the government pays the interest while you're in school during that grace period or in deferment. Unsubsidized, the interest is occurring at all times. Now, private student loans, those are going to be offered by banks and other private financial institutions. These are often going to require a credit check. And if your credit score isn't as great as it should be or as it needed to be, you can also have a cosigner to kind of back you up. So with these private student loans, the protections are going to vary highly between institutions. Also, you're not going to be available for public student loan forgiveness. And most importantly, you really want to be cautious of higher interest rates and even prepayment penalties. When we talk about the differences between consolidation and refinancing, whenever you refinance your loans, a private lender is going to pay off your student loans. You're going to develop some sort of new repayment schedule, and your interest rate should ideally be lower. It could possibly be higher if you're looking to really extend that loan period out. And again, you're going to lose a lot of those federal protections when you have private student loans. So going over just the quick anatomy of a student loan, I was really kind of proud of myself for this phrasing. So loan status, that's that repayment period. After someone graduates from PT school, they have that 6 months before they actually are requiring to have those payments. Deferral, that's usually when you're in PT school. Forbearance, that's when you're, for some reason, you're developing some sort of hardship. Past due. And then delinquent, that's when we're kind of missing our payments, and that's not a situation that we want to be in. So number 8, number 9, what is the principal? So the principal is the original amount of the loan. So let's just use $1,000. $1,000 at a 10% interest rate. So that principal is at $100,000. 1 year goes by at 10% interest. At the end of that year, you're going to be at $1,010. So that's that interest building on top of that. And interest can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing depending on what's going on. Now, whenever you change loan statuses, say you're going from deferral to repayment, a lot of times that interest rate is going to be capitalized. So that interest rate is now going to join into that principal payment. So not only now you're kind of the example we're talking about, that $1,000, it becomes $1,010. So now you're paying 10% interest on that total principal. So different types of interest rates, you're going to see fixed versus variable. Usually with public student loans, they're going to be fixed. And anytime you're working with private student loans, you have an option between going fixed and variable. A variable student loan is usually kind of tied towards the market or some type of index. You have an opportunity for a lower interest rate but then you also have the risk of that interest rate going higher. In general, it's usually recommended to go with that fixed interest rate. That way you can plan accordingly. Okay, so this is where we're gonna kind of go through things relatively quickly because I want to get to that retirement planning portion. We're gonna talk about the different types of repayment plans, and to kind of understand the differences between these different types of repayment plans, we're going to use an example of a new grad who is single. They don't have any dependents. They owe $70,000 of public student loan debt unsubsidized at a 6% interest rate. After this, we'll kind of pause and answer any sort of questions. So this is from the FAFSA website. You can always do this if you ever want to play with different types of situations. So on this left-hand side, we're marking down single, no dependents. And then right through here, that current loan balance, $70,000. This hypothetical person is going to be making $65,000 in the state of Florida and no income tax in Florida. So standard repayment plan, if you don't touch your student loans after you graduate, this is what you're automatically going to be put on. So it calculates your total student loans plus interest in 10 years, and it just bases your number off of that. Your student loans are going to be paid off in 10 years exactly if you never miss a payment or pay extra. This is going to be the fastest way to pay off your student loan debt, if you're kind of following black and white, the different types of rules with these payment plans. Now, this is not going to be recommended for someone who's seeking public student loan forgiveness, and we'll talk about that a lot in these upcoming slides. For public student loan forgiveness, you're going to want to be on what's called an IDR, an income-driven repayment plan. This picture on the left kind of highlights it's going to be the same payment from the beginning and same payment to the end. So with our example, they're going to be paying $777. That initial $60,000, $70,000 of student loan eventually becomes $93,000 when you take into that interest. So graduated repayment plan. This is the same thing as the 10-year plan as far as the time frame, but your payments are going to be relatively low to start, and every 2 years it's going to slowly ramp up. So you can kind of see that on this infographic. In our example, that first monthly payment is going to be $444, and that last monthly payment is going to be bumped up to $1,300. So if you're looking at this, you just want to be realistic about how much growth in your income do you really expect over 10 years. Again, this is not recommended if you're seeking public student loan forgiveness, because this is not an income-driven repayment plan. So extended repayment plans, these are the same thing. It's just broken. It's extended to a 25-year time frame versus a 10-year time frame. Again, not recommended for public student loan forgiveness. You can kind of see these numbers out to the side. So now we're going to start getting into these different types of IDR plans, income-driven repayment plans. So this first one that we're going to talk about is income-based repayment for old and new borrowers. It basically just depends on when you took out your student loans. So with these types of IDR plans, your payments are going to be based off a percentage of your income. So with the IBR plan, it's going to be 15% of your monthly income. Now, it's going to be important to highlight that as your income changes, whether it goes up or down, your payment plan is going to change. And you can kind of see the breakdown of the numbers through here. So repay or pay, these are both going to be, again, IDR plans. Your payment is based on a percentage of your income. The biggest difference between repay and pay is that pay is going to limit your monthly payment. It'll never be more than the standard repayment plan, that first repayment option that we went through. For this, you have to demonstrate some type of financial hardship. For new grad PTs, especially if you're single, that's not really too difficult to get through. So this is going to highlight the little differences between these different plans. So with pay, it's going to be 10% of your discretionary income. Repay, it's going to be 10% of your discretionary income, but there's no cap. So say, for instance, you get a promotion, you go into home health or something like that, your salary increases significantly. That's still going to be 10% of your discretionary income, versus with pay, it's always going to be 10% or less than that standard payment plan. Something to be mindful of is that with pay versus repay, with pay, both balances income are eligible debt is considered filing jointly versus repay, both spouses' income and eligible debt is considered regardless of filing status. So if you have a significant other and they're not in a lot of debt and maybe they make a lot of income, this is what you want to look at when you're talking about these different types of repayment plans. So this is just a breakdown of how that example is going to go through. It's going to be relatively similar. So income contingent repayment plan, this is going to be the same thing. This is a type of IDR plan, and this is going to be 20% of your income or less. And then we have the example going through here. I know I'm kind of going through these quickly. For the payment plans, especially for these are relatively black and white. You can go to the FAFSA website and kind of put in your own numbers and see what your breakdown would be. So this is where we're going to highlight, what if our new grad owes $150,000 in federal student loans? And we saw that statistic earlier. This is not uncommon for especially new grad PTs coming out in 2020. So this is the big thing that I want to highlight. When we talk about public student loan forgiveness or loan forgiveness in general, not a lot of people know that your loans are going to be forgiven 20 to 25 years, 25 years if these are graduate level loans. Now, if you look on the left-hand side, we're going to use pay an example of this person owing $150,000 in student loan debt. They're eventually going to pay off their student loans in 240 months. The total amount paid is $167,000, and the total amount forgiven is going to be $162,000. Now, that seems kind of like a good situation, right? You're not paying too much in interest, and you're getting a lot of these loans forgiven. But if you're going this route, where you're going through loan forgiveness in the 20 to 25 year plan, at the end of that 20 to 25 years, you're going to be hit with what's called a tax bomb. So any amount of your loans that are forgiven are going to be considered income by the federal government, by the IRS. So it's going to be as if you made an extra $162,000. So you were going to be taxed on top of that. Now, that can be something that you can prepare for. The biggest thing is that we want to be educated. If we're going to go this type of strategy, there's certain things that you can do to mitigate your risk and prepare for this situation. Versus if we go through the public student loan forgiveness, that's what this little acronym is for. You're going to see that $150,000, you're only going to pay $60,000 in total in this first kind of payment plan to pay. And the amount forgiven is going to be $179,000. And there's not going to be a tax bomb at the end of that. Now, that seems like a really good situation too. But as we'll talk about a little bit later, there's inherent risk if you're going with this public student loan forgiveness. It's very effective, especially if you have a large amount of debt, but there's certain things that you want to be mindful of so you can go through this strategy appropriately. All right, so we'll touch on this and we'll take a moment for questions if we have any. So differences between consolidation and refinancing. Consolidation is just taking all of your student loans and then combining them to one single loan, and then your interest rate is going to be average. You're not really going to save a lot of money. You're not going to really spend a little bit more. The big thing with that is it's going to be easier to keep track of your student loan repayment options. And this is also going to be necessary if you're going to go through the public student loan forgiveness route. Now, refinancing, we talked about that earlier. That's when you're going to take your loans and you're going to move them to a private institution. Now, that can be just your public student loans, or it can be a combination of public and private loans. So you may get a lower interest rate, but that doesn't necessarily mean that your monthly payment is going to be lower. This is something that might be a good option if your strategy is going to be hyper aggression. You want to pay off your student loans as fast as possible because you might be able to save a little bit of money in regards to interest rate. In general, the shorter your payment period is, the lower your interest rate. So as we just went over the different types of loan repayment plans, the shortest one is 10 years. I did a little bit of research on different refinancing options. They have a 7-year plan and a 5-year plan. Again, your monthly payment is going to be fairly large, but you're probably going to get a much better interest rate. So things you want to consider before refinancing your student loans. You want to make sure that your finances are stable, because when you refinance, your loans aren't going to be eligible for a lot of these federal protections. You're not going to have these income-driven plans. You're not going to have as much of an opportunity for things like forbearance, and you're going to lose in general a lot of these federal protections. You want to make sure that you have a good credit score, or if you don't have a great credit score, thinking about someone that can co-sign on your refinance student loans. Just be mindful that that person co-signing is going to also be responsible for your student loans. And this is the craziest thing. So protections and conditions will vary between lenders. We talked about that earlier. And there are situations where you have prepayment penalties. This is very, very wild to me, that the way these institutions make money is this interest that they're getting off of your student loans. Now, there are some institutions that will actually penalize you for paying more than your agreed upon monthly payment. And not all of them are going to have opportunities for forbearance. So if you're thinking about refinancing your student loans, you really want to go through the fine print of what types of protections are available and are not available. All right, so we can, before we get into this, Marino, do we have any questions at the moment?
Not at the moment, no.
Okay, very good. So next we're going to go through public student loan forgiveness. And after that, we're going to get into kind of retirement planning and in general personal finance. So let's get right through this. Public student loan forgiveness. To qualify for this, you have to be employed by a US federal, state, local, tribal, or non-for-profit. The big thing with this is that you have to work full time. You need to transition your loans. And again, these are only public student loans that are available for this. And you want to consolidate them, like we talked about earlier, into one big loan. So you're going to repay your loans under an income-driven repayment plan and make 120 qualifying payments. So we kind of always talk about public student loan forgiveness. It's going to take 10 years. Not necessarily. What we're looking for is 120 qualifying payments, and those do not have to be consecutive. You can have 1 or 2 years in between. As long as you get back into a nonprofit, you can continue with this strategy as long as you're making qualifying payments. So what is a qualifying payment? So let's talk about what's not qualified. So payments made while in school, grace period, and deferment and forbearance are non-qualified. And this kind of goes against the normal advice as far as paying off your student loans early. So the biggest thing that you want to do before you're deciding on what type of strategy, before deciding on paying off your loans, you want to know what type of strategy that you're going to go through. Because if you're making payments thinking, all right, I just want to get ahead on my interest rate, but you decide on going with the public student loan forgiveness route, you're basically throwing away money at this point. So again, 120 qualifying payments do not have to be consecutive, and they don't have to be with the same employer. But your payment amount will change based on your income. I will highlight the importance of making sure that as your income changes, your payment also changes, because you might be making payments that are not qualified. This is going to be something I talk about a lot during this section, is that you have to be sure that you plan to work full time for at least 10 years. That's the big thing, because you're going to be, for some people, you're going to be upside down on your student loans. And just because you're working for a nonprofit institution does not guarantee that the PT department or the rehab department is nonprofit. Really interesting situation there. So risk involved with public student loan forgiveness. You really want to understand what kind of plan you're going to be on. The lender may not always give you credit for your payments, and the lender may not charge you correctly for your payments. So a lot of personal responsibility, making sure that everything is being done correctly, and you want to continue to make sure that this is done correctly throughout that 120 qualifying payments. So risk number one, public student loan forgiveness is not a repayment plan. It is a feature of other types of income-driven repayment plans. So that IDR, then there's 5 different ones that we talked about earlier through here. So on these plans, your monthly payments are going to be based on a percentage of your income, 10, 15, 20%. This is the thing to be mindful of. Your monthly payments may be less than the interest you're being charged. This is being upside down on your loans. So you're making these monthly payments, but your overall balance is continuing to increase. So if something were to happen and you're not able to go through this route, you're either going to go through this hyper aggressive option, or you're going to go through the 25-year repayment plan and end up with that tax bomb at the end. So risk, people leaving a nonprofit early. Maybe you're starting a family and you're not wanting to work full time, or a private company comes in and buys the rehab department and they're contracted out. Again, remember, you may be upside down on your student loans. Just to highlight again, so on these IDR plans, your loans will still be forgiven in 20 or 25 years, but any loans forgiven will be taxed as income, and that's that tax bomb that we want to be very, very mindful of. 20 years for undergrad loans, 25 years for any type of graduate student loans. So risk number 2, the lender may not always give you credit for your payments, and this is just I think this is just usually a human error thing that goes on. So the example that I've seen about is a new grad having 9 different types of student loans. Their loans are 6 of them were being qualified as good to go. 3 of those loans were not getting paid. So if you're not catching this in this 10-year or 120 qualifying payments, this is going to be a difficult thing to kind of fight against the lender. So you really, really want to make sure that your payments are qualified and all of your paperwork is good to go. So risk number 3, the lender may not charge you correctly. So that payment, again, is based on a percentage of your income. Now, if you're being overcharged, your loans are still going to be forgiven, but you're just throwing money down the drain. And worst case scenario, if your payments are being undercharged, you're no longer making qualifying payments. So other considerations with public student loan forgiveness, you do not want to refinance your public student loans if this is the strategy that you're thinking about, because when you refinance, you're taking those public student loans and you're transitioning them to a private student loan. You do not want to pay more than you're obligated to. You basically want to pay the bare minimum, whatever you're obligated to, and then you want to either save the rest or invest the rest. And always being mindful, anytime you switch jobs, anytime you get a raise, you want to double check that your payments are going to be adjusted accordingly. This is going to be especially important if you're on any type of auto pay payment plan. So all of these plans. Yeah.
Sorry, we do have a couple questions. Just one was, do they look at your income when they're determining your interest rate for refinancing?
That's a good question. I think that's a part of the equation. I think the most important part of the equation is going to be your overall credit score.
And then the other question was just, are you familiar with other loan forgiveness programs other than PSLF?
Yeah, the only other type of loan forgiveness payment plans that I'm aware of is the other IDR plans, which at the end of the 25 years, those loans are forgiven, but then you have that tax bomb at the end. There may be some other types of, like if you're working in a like rural community, that type of thing, but I'm not aware of those types of plans and the sort of like layout of those types of things.
Thank you, that's all for now.
Yeah, keep the questions coming. So again, if you're going through this route, the public student loan forgiveness route, the biggest risk is that your loans don't get forgiven for whatever reason. The easiest and the most effective way to mitigate this risk is to save money. You want to save money just in case. So if your loans still get forgiven after 120 qualifying payments, great. You're in a good situation. Now you have this money to either invest in the market, you can put a down payment on a house, you're good to go. But if something were to happen and you are not going with this strategy anymore and your loans aren't going to be forgiven, in this situation, you have options. So you want to save money to prepare for the risk of your loans not being forgiven, to give yourself options. So with this situation, you have kind of 2 things that you can decide. If you're coming off of the public student loan forgiveness route, you can either stay on whatever income-driven repayment plan that you are on, continue to save money and prepare for that upcoming tax bomb. if your overall student loan balance is on the lower end, you might think about maybe just beginning a more aggressive payment plan. You take that big lump sum of money that you saved up, you throw it to your student loans, and you transition to, all right, now I'm going to be hyper aggressive. I'm going to try to knock this out as fast as I can. So,
and a couple other questions now.
Yeah, let's hear.
Are the PSLF that you are aware of provided through school system pediatric fields, or what other case would be offered?
It can be any type of employer as long as they are either the federal, state government, local government, or I think it's the Native American local tribes. So as long as they're a nonprofit, specifically the rehab department, whoever you are working for is nonprofit, you're good to go.
These qualifying payments are in regards to public service or the IDRP, like REPAE or P repay.
Yeah, so a qualifying payment. So just to reiterate, so with public student loan forgiveness, you're going to be on one of those IDR plans. So those income driven repayment plans. Let me go back really quick. Because this is important. So there's 5 different versions of the income driven repayment plans. So if you're going this route, you want to make sure that you're on one of these different types of plans. Now, depending on if you're married, depending on if you have other types of student loans, that's what's going to help you make that decision on what's going to be best for you. Again, you want to figure out which type of these plans are going to give you the lowest monthly payment if this is the strategy that you want to go through, because the name of the game is pay the bare minimum that you're obligated and then save the rest of that money to either put a lump sum towards your student loans if you come off of this loan forgiveness program, or prepare for that tax bomb at the end. That's a good question. I know there's a lot of different acronyms here.
And then last question for now, how do income-driven plans work for those of us who have variable incomes, for instance, an independent contractor?
Ooh, that is a great question. So that is going to come into here. Oh yeah, perfect. So we're on that slide now. So that's actually a very, very good question. You're going to want to, right through here, certify your income every year. So you may have to be doing this multiple times, especially if your income is changing month to month or every couple of months. Yeah, so that's something that you're really going to be, you want to be on top of in regards to certifying your income. That's an interesting, whoever asked that question, I'd be interested to know, are you certain that you're working for a nonprofit? And just let me know if they have that follow-up question or that follow-up answer, Marina.
Will do.
All right, so implementing public student loan forgiveness. So again, to reiterate, you want to make sure that you are on an IDR plan. After you graduate PT school, if you don't mess around, you don't pick your student loan plan on your own, they're going to automatically put you on that standard repayment plan. So you really want to be certain that you're on an IDR plan. For most people, IBR for new borrowers or pay is going to be the best strategy to go through. So number 2, you want to certify your income every year. Failure to do so may get you kicked off your IDR plan. Your interest capitalizes. That's where that interest gets combined with the principal, and then that's your new principal. And that's definitely what you don't want to do. And just missing payments, missing qualifying payments. So employment certification form, you're going to want to do this at least once a year. This is just going to make sure that your loans are getting moved over to Fed Loan. This is going to make sure that you, your loans, and your employer qualify for public student loan forgiveness. And you want to do this at least one time a year. So there are situations like we talked about earlier, you're working for maybe a nonprofit hospital, but they contract the rehab department with a nonprofit company, and you are no longer in a qualified employer. So it's very, very important that you're doing this all the time, at least one time a year. I know a lot of people, when they certify their income, they're basically, they fill out the form. It takes maybe 1-2 months for that form to get back. and then you're filling it out again. You're just consistently doing this over and over and over again, because you really want to make sure that your payments are qualified and they're good to go. Yeah. Any other questions at this point, Marina?
Yeah, so we have 2 questions: advice on staying on top of lender to make sure that you're making qualifying loan payments.
Okay, so that goes back to,
and then I'm seeing that, oh yeah, sorry, go ahead.
oh, no worries. So that's going to go back to certifying your income every year. That's something that you want to, I know it says every year right here, but you're going to want to do that multiple times a year, especially if you're worried about something not being right.
And then the second part was, I'm seeing that reports like that like 1% of borrowers actually get approved for PSLF. Is that true?
So for my understanding, that sort of like, what's the term? Attention grabbing headline is not 100% true. If you are really, really interested in this public student loan forgiveness route, I'm going to give a shout out to, I'm going to scroll all the way up to this company over here, FitBucks. They're a company that basically they give you a lot of free information, and if you want to hire them on, one of the things that they do is they help you really stay on top of either your lenders or your employer to make sure that all of your qualifying payments are actually qualified. So it's a big shout out to FitBucks. I know that was as far as when I was researching this topic, this was a big resource when I got a lot of this information.
And then another one is, if the government decides to get rid of the PSLF plan before your 120 payments are up, are you grandfathered in, or is it transitioned to a 20 to 25-year plan?
Yeah, that's a really interesting, that's an important question to bring up. So the unfortunate answer is who knows. So anytime you're relying on the government to provide you a service, there's always that inherent risk that things might change. It's really wild. I know that's not the answer that you probably want to hear, but unfortunately that's the truth. Anytime you're relying on someone else to help you with these student loan repayment plans, that's the risk that you have. Is it going to happen? Probably not, but it'd be dishonest for me to say that it's impossible to happen. Anything else, Marina? We're good to go.
We did have someone ask if the recording of this audio would be available somewhere, or if they might be able to obtain that, or the presentation somehow.
So the presentation should be available. At least I had it sent out. If it's not, I'll give you guys my email at the end, and I'm happy to send this to anybody. Anything else?
Sorry, yeah, I was muted there.
Yeah,
sorry.
No,
based on what you mentioned earlier, if I choose to defer payments to 12 months after graduation rather than starting repayment 6 months after graduation, does that automatically disqualify me from ever entering a public student loan repayment program?
No, it does not. It doesn't.
Okay.
Now, you have to be mindful of is if you're deferring payments, your loan balance is, your loans are still going to accrue interest, which is not necessarily like a bad thing if you're going through this public student loan forgiveness route. And that may be a newer thing with COVID as far as being able to defer, because the usual is 6 months. Now, if there's something new that I'm not aware of, you should be good to go. Just being sure that you're actually in deferral and you're not missing payments or becoming delinquent.
And that's all for now. Thank you.
Great. So this last portion of this presentation is going to go through personal finance, investing and retirement planning. Again, this is not specific advice. This is meant to be general education and hopefully a little bit entertaining. I know I'm speaking very, very fast. I'm going to try to get through all of this information in an hour. So creating a budget, I know this is something that not everyone in the world has done, but it's fairly simple to do. So this little infographic, step number 1, you just want to make sure that you have all your financial statements. Number 2, you want to calculate your income. Now, if your income fluctuates, something that you can do is just get an average and try to work with that. Step number 3, you want to create a list of monthly expenses. And then number 4, you want to determine, are those expenses fixed or are they variable? So things that are fixed expenses, something like your rent, your insurance, probably your student loan repayment. You want to start with those, and then you want to figure out what are your variable expenses. This is something that I highly recommend that everyone does, because it shows you where your money is going. Now, number 5 is that your total monthly expense, you total your monthly income and your expenses. And step number 6, you make adjustments to expenses. So what you want to create is what's called a $0 budget. So you have your income, let's just use something simple, say it's $4,000. You want all of that $4,000 to be going towards something. So whether it's your housing, your loans, saving, investing, you want to have every dollar of that $4,000 to have a specific job. And just like anything else, it's going to be difficult to be 100% accurate with your budget in the beginning, and that's okay. You're going to make these adjustments accordingly, because you're going to think, maybe I only spend $200 on groceries or fast food. And as you kind of actually manage your finances, you realize you're someone like me and you go to Chick-fil-A like 2-3 times a week, and your variable expenses of fast food is a lot higher than you thought. Mint.com is just one of the budgeting apps. This is something that I use. They have a web browser version and something that goes onto your phone. It's great because it connects to your banking, your checking account, and it connects towards your student loans. And it gives you very, very nice visuals on what's going on. But $0 budget, that's what you want to figure, that's what you want to try to create. With your income, every single dollar of your income has a specific job and has a specific place that it needs to go. Then every month, I can basically tell you that those first 3 months, they're not going to be perfect, and it's probably never going to be 100% perfect. But as you continue to adjust your budget over time, you're going to start to see, okay, this is what I'm really spending. And then highlighting, this is things that I'm spending money on that maybe I could not spend money on, or maybe I can find an alternative to save some money there. All right. So investing for retirement 101. So differences between an IRA and a 401k. So an IRA is an individual retirement account. You can make this on your own. You can make it right now if you haven't already. A 401k is an employee sponsored plan. So you have to be employed by somebody who is offering a 401k plan. Now, within your IRA and your 401k, you have the difference between a Roth or a traditional. For most people, a Roth IRA or a Roth 401k is going to make the most sense. So with a Roth IRA or a Roth 401k, the money that you put into it is taxed immediately. And then as that money grows, when you eventually take it out, there's no longer a tax there. So for most of us, we can expect our income to increase over time. So right now, say you're making $70,000, your tax rate is going to be a lot lower compared to maybe 20 years from now, 30 years from now, when you're making 6 figures, that tax rate. So you want to pay the least amount of taxes, and then you want that money to grow tax-free. So what does it mean to grow tax-free? So say, we'll go back to our $1,000 example. Say I put that $1,000 in, it gets taxed. That $1,000, if you put $1,000 into a Roth IRA and you let it just sit there in a proper, well, we're going to talk about a target date fund, from the age of 20 to the age of 65, that $1,000 is eventually going to turn into roughly $88,000. It's crazy. It's an 88 times multiplier. Now, that $1,000 is eventually going to be taxed, but whatever it grows to, that large 80-ish $1,000, that's all yours. The government's not going to take any more money out of that. Versus a traditional 401k or a traditional IRA, that money is tax deductible. So you can write off that in your taxes. But once you get to retirement, that's when that money is being taxed. So say I'm making a lot more money now. I didn't know what I was doing. I signed up for a traditional 401k. That $80,000 that I have built up, that's now going to be taxed. Versus with a Roth IRA, it's only going to be taxed at that original $1,000. I know it's kind of confusing. So just in general, if you expect your income to increase over time, usually you're going to want to go with a Roth 401k or a Roth IRA. And in actuality, after I think it's $130,000, $140,000 in income, you no longer qualify for a Roth IRA. So you want to take advantage of that while you can, because it's all about saving as much money in taxes as you can. So
one question we had,
yeah,
sorry, it was just what kind of options similar to these would you have if you were an independent contractor?
So
and you're not offered an IRA or 401k?
Yeah, so anyone, whether you're an independent contractor or you work for a big system, is eligible for an IRA. And we're gonna, in the next couple of slides, we'll talk about, you can do this with Vanguard, you can do this Fidelity, Charles Schwab. Anybody can do this regardless of employer. Now, in regards to a 401k, if you are an entrepreneur, like you have your own business, there are ways where you can set up your own 401k. That's kind of beyond the scope of this lecture. But anybody, regardless of employer, can set up an IRA. If you haven't done that already, setting up a Roth IRA, if you qualify, that's what I want you to do. That's something I would highly, highly recommend. Shoot me an email. If you do set up a Roth IRA, that'll make my day, because you can save and you can build so much money the earlier that you start. Any other questions for me now?
That's all for now, thank you.
Okay. So now we're going to kind of talk about a 401k match. So what is a 401k match? So let's just read it from the slide. So when you contribute money to your 401k, some employers pitch in. They may match it a certain dollar amount or a percentage of what you put in. Now, a 401k match is one of the best investments that you can make. It's, especially if it's dollar for dollar, that's a 100% return on your investment. You're not really going to find that too often when you get deeper and deeper into investments. We're going to highlight the importance of taking advantage of that 401k match and how my overall mindset of personal finance has changed. And I'm glad it's changed, because I could have missed out on, you'll see in the example, $400,000, $500,000 in my nest egg. How we doing, Marina?
Just a question of, do you have to be employed to have a Roth IRA?
No, not at all. Anybody can set up a Roth IRA, anybody. And I highly, highly recommend that you do it. And we're going to talk about what do we put in to this Roth IRA or this Roth 401k, because these are only vehicles. A Roth IRA is not an investment in itself. You put things into your Roth IRA, you put things into your 401k, and we'll kind of talk about that in 1 or 2 slides. The importance of asset allocation. When you're younger, you're going to want to have more volatile, more riskier investments. As you get closer to retirement, you want those investments to be on the more conservative end. And there's an easy way that you can have that done on your own, or have it done for you, I should say.
That's all for now. Thank you.
Great. I like all the questions. Okay, so right through here, we kind of talked about this earlier. A 401k and IRA are just vehicles. What are you going to put into them? So most people are kind of in the periphery. They've heard of bonds, they've heard of stocks. A bond is basically like an IOU. I give the federal government $1,000. They say, okay, thank you for this $1,000. I'll give you 1-2% in interest on that. Versus a stock is when you're actually buying ownership into a company. In general, stocks are going to be more volatile in regards to, it can go up, it can go down. The good thing with that is that you have an opportunity to make a lot more in regards to your return on investment. But on the flip side of that, you also have the opportunity to lose a lot of money. And we'll talk about how to mitigate that risk. So
as a current
Sure.
student or part-time student, to start a Roth IRA, how much would you suggest consistently contributing into it?
Ooh, that is a personal question that I can't give you personal advice on. What I would say is the money that you put into your Roth IRA, you have to understand that this money is something that you're not going to touch until you retire. This is money that you don't feel like you're going to ever need, because that's going to take away the power of compound interest and the purpose of the Roth IRA. We're kind of getting deeper into the weeds here, but not a lot of people know that with a Roth IRA, the principal, whatever you put in, you can actually take that out without any type of penalty. You can't take out the interest, but you can take out the original principal. So say I put in $1,000, that we're just going to stick with it. I put in one lump sum of $1,000. I've never put in any more money. 10 years goes by, and now that $1,000 has turned into $40,000. These are just made up numbers. I can still take out that $1,000, but I can't touch any of that other money without incurring significant penalties. And like we talked about earlier, you really want to mitigate how much taxes you pay, how much fees you incur, and overall, like any type of penalties, because that's just thrown away money. But anybody can set up an IRA, and I'll kind of show you guys how easy it is. You can do it in 10, 15 minutes. All right. I think I see one more, Marina.
In a Roth IRA is the type of account you would suggest a student opens?
Yeah, 100%. In big picture, I know I keep saying this is not specific advice. As a student, you're more likely going to want to set up a Roth IRA, and you're going to want to set it up in a low fee broker like Vanguard, Fidelity, Charles Schwab. All right, so let's get back into it. So how are we doing? Okay, we're going to kind of run through these. So bonds, an IOU, you're not going to make a ton of money with bonds, but you're also not going to lose a ton of money in bonds. Versus stocks, you're taking ownership. This is where you kind of hear people say like, man, I bought 100 shares of Tesla. Now I'm swimming and I'm making so much money. When you're buying individual stocks, the volatility and the risk is very, very high. Now, how do we mitigate that risk? We mitigate that risk by using what's called an index fund. So we're looking at the bottom left here. What are index funds? Funds decide to accurately track a benchmark index. So a benchmark index, a measure of a certain section of the stock market. So the most popular, the most famous type of benchmark index fund is the S&P 500. So the S&P 500 is the top 500 companies in the United States. And this is going to kind of adjust depending on how these companies are performing. But the benefit and the big advantage with index funds is that your risk is mitigated because your portfolio is diversified. Now, I could buy one share of Apple for, I don't know how much that's going for right now, or I could buy one share of the S&P 500, and I can own a portion of all 500 of these companies. So that includes Apple, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, those big tech companies. If you buy one share of the S&P 500, you are technically a part owner of all 500 of these companies. That way, if Apple comes out with a really, really bad phone or something like that, and their stock prices crash, all of these other businesses can help even out that type of decrease or that loss through there. So it really mitigates your risk when you go into an index fund versus a single stock. I think we have one question here, Marino.
It was just a comment, just
Okay.
saying great advice on investing in repayment and student loans.
Awesome.
It'd be great to provide all PT students and their parents.
Yeah, okay, so we're gonna run through the rest of the slides and then we'll take all the questions at the end. So we talked about the 401k match and how important it is to take advantage of this 401k match. So we're going to use a little example here. So Caitlin and Thomas recently graduated law school. This is from the Money Guy shows. I highly recommend these guys. They both have $100,000 in student loans at 4% interest, a 20-year term. Caitlin pays an extra $500 per month to the loans, while Thomas saves $500 per month to get his employer match. A 6% match on a 100K salary. 6% match is great. Now, if you talked to me about 2 years ago, I would be the type of person who's like, Caitlin, I hate debt. I want to get out of debt as fast as I can, whatever it takes. I'm not going to use that money to get my employer match. I'm going to use that money to be more aggressive with my student loans. We're going to talk about how this black and white thinking has severe consequences. So right through here, let's see if I can move this guy. Okay, so Thomas, again, there's $100,000 in student loans. He paid more overall for his student loans, but his 401k balance is significantly higher. So if we look at this top left, Thomas pays $145,000 over 20 years. Caitlin pays $119,000 over 9 years. And then in this example, once she's done paying off her student loans, she puts that money that was going towards a student loan, she puts that towards her 401k. So now she's trying to play catch up. So Caitlin, if we're looking at just the student loans, she saved $26,000 in interest, which if you just looked at that, that seems like a great situation. Now, as we kind of alluded to, it gets a lot deeper than that. We're going to look at this bottom picture now. At the end of this 20-year term, they both have $0 in their loan balance. They're great. They don't have any more student loan debt. Since Thomas, in the beginning, took advantage of his employer 401k match, his 401k balance is $743,000 versus Caitlin, who waited 9 years to take advantage of the match. Her 401k balance is only $257,000. And this is the biggest thing as far as like mindset shift for me that I wanted to highlight. In the past, I'd be like, let's pay off the student loan debt. Let's get it over with. Now there's an opportunity cost with missing out on that 401k match. And this $26,000, yeah, it looks like a good call, but definitely not worth this $300,000, $400,000 in missed income by not taking advantage of that 401k match. In reality, this is a very black and white example. Usually the best strategy is somewhere in the middle. If you're going through this more aggressive option, maybe you still take advantage of that 401k match, but you're still being hyper aggressive. There's a gray area in this black and white example, but really highlighting the benefit of taking advantage of that 401k match. All right, so we're going to talk about quickly the differences between active versus passive funds. Are you overpaying for underperformance? So an active fund is you have someone or a group of people, they're trying to beat the market. They're trying to beat that benchmark index of the S&P 500. What we see is that the majority of the time, these active managers are not overperforming. They're not doing better than the basic benchmark index. So this bottom left here, right there, how often do index funds beat active managers? You can see that most of the time, 80% of the time, these passive index funds are going to beat the active managers, but it doesn't end there. It gets worse. So because you have somebody actively trying to pick these winners to go beyond the index fund, you have to pay for that person, and they have a fee included with that. So if we look at the top right picture, expenses of active funds versus index funds. These index funds 0.42% versus your actively managed funds 0.12. I know that doesn't seem like a lot, but that's a significant difference, especially as we get closer to retirement. So if you're someone who already has a 401k or already has an IRA set up, I encourage you to take a look at what are your fees? What do your fees look like? Because that is lost money. That money could have been reinvested into your 401k to continue to make you more money. On top of that, anytime you're actively trading these funds, there's usually a tax on top of that. So you're going to see a greater amount of what we call tax drag or a tax cost ratio through this. So this bottom one, Vanguard 500 index fund, we're looking at 0.48 versus American funds. This is going to be actively managed 1.71. So a significant difference in taxes and also fees when you have these active managers. This bottom right picture, just to highlight that while everyone doesn't know this, a lot of people are starting to catch on. You're seeing a lot more people transition from active funds to passive funds. All right, we're gonna try to blow through. So now we're gonna talk about what we got on time. Okay, now we're gonna talk about the practical guide to setting up a Roth IRA and then what to do, what to put into that. So when do you set up a Roth IRA? As soon as possible. I highly recommend that if you haven't already set up a Roth IRA, that you do that now. So where do you want to do it? A low-cost investment provider. Fidelity, Vanguard, Charles Schwab, these are all great people to work with. These are brokers. Now, how? What do you put into your Roth IRA? Again, this is not specific advice. This is me just highlighting that the benefits of it is a target date retirement fund. So a target date retirement fund is wonderful as far as you do something and then it's hands off. You don't really have to worry about that. So we talked about earlier, index funds offer broad levels of diversification versus a single stock. You own a small piece of every company. Now with these low cost target date funds, they're an easy way to decrease your risk and volatility as you move closer to retirement. So we're looking at this bottom right picture, this bottom blue section, these are US stocks. As we talked about earlier, stocks, they're more volatile, they go up and down, but they provide you with a greater return on your investment. So in the beginning, as you're a younger individual, you really want to take advantage of these higher volatility types of investments because number one, they offer you a higher rate of return. And then number two, you have time to wait out these dips in the market. So say, for example, in 2008, when the market crashed, everything was basically on sale because everything is going to be a lot cheaper. This retirement money is money that you're never going to touch until you reach retirement. Then as you get closer to the age of retirement, you can see how it dwindles. This blue US stocks, it dwindles over time. So as those US stocks dwindle over time and you put more in bonds, your rate of return is going to be a lot lower. You're not going to make as much money. But on the flip side of that, there's going to be a lot less volatility in things like bonds because when you're getting closer to retirement, you want to focus more on defense. You just want to avoid losing money versus focusing on getting a lot of money. So a target date fund, it does that for you over time. We call this redoing your portfolio, your asset allocation. Your asset allocation should not be the same from the age of 25 to the age of 60. It should be more aggressive when you're younger because you can wait out those dips, and it should be more conservative as you get closer to retirement. And a target date fund does that for you automatically. It does that for you automatically. So we're nearing the end here. So I just wanted to highlight the power of compound interest. So what is compound interest? It's basically interest on top of interest. So we use this $1,000 example. I put $1,000 in. After a year, it becomes $1,010. Now, after the next year, I get 10% on that $1,010, and it's just increases over time. So it's not a linear progression. It's an exponential progression where it's going to start low, and then as your nest egg increases, it's going to shoot up. It's going to shoot up significantly. So we're almost done through here. So I really enjoyed this infographic from the Money Guys. At the age of 20, if you just put in $95 a month. That type of putting in money is going to end up being $1 million at the age of 60, 65. So at the age of 20, it's costing you $95 a month. Now, someone who maybe they didn't get started right away, at the age of 30, to hit that $1 million mark, now you're requiring to save $270 a month. So just highlighting how important it is to get started in retirement planning, retirement investing as soon as you can, because when you're younger, you can save less and you can make more. This kind of column in the middle is that wealth multiplier. So every dollar that you put in at the age of 20 has the opportunity to become $88, versus at the age of 30, every dollar that you put in has the opportunity to turn to $23. Still very, very good. But man, you could really, really make a lot of money in regards to your investments the sooner that you start. Okay, we're gonna go through this quickly. Choosing a financial advisor, you wanna know the differences between a fiduciary versus a broker. So fiduciary, you can kind of think of them as a dietitian. You ask them, what do I need to eat to be healthy? They're gonna give you a combination of fruits, vegetables, and meat. Versus a butcher is gonna tell you, what do I need to be healthy? You really wanna eat meat. That's gonna be the best thing for you. So a fiduciary, usually they're a fee only. Like you pay them one thing and then they're gonna give you whatever advice that they have. Versus a broker, they have an incentive to sell you specific things because they work on commission. So if they sell you this fund or this fund, they make a little bit more money. Now, not all brokers are bad and not all fiduciaries are great, but it's important to understand what is their financial motivation? How do they get paid? That's just something to think about as you're choosing a financial advisor. So differing philosophies on personal finance. In the past, I was really big on Dave Ramsey. Now I'm more towards these guys. What you'll notice with these differing philosophies is that they both start off with building a basic emergency fund. So Dave Ramsey tells you to save $1,000. These guys tell you to save enough to cover your largest deductible. So maybe your health insurance deductible, because it's not if an emergency happens, it's when an emergency happens. So the best thing that you can do in the beginning is to build up a beginner emergency fund. That way, when something happens, not if something happens, you're prepared, you have that money on hand versus having to take out credit card debt with a crazy, crazy high interest rate. All right, so just to conclude, so personal finance is very, very personal. The best thing that you can do is educate yourself. That way you can ask the right questions when you eventually talk to a financial advisor or you're doing your own independent research. So you wanna find a trustworthy licensed advisor to help you. And if there's one big takeaway, you wanna understand the power of compound interest and the importance of starting early. That way you too can have $1 million nest egg in retirement. All right, that's the end of the presentation through here, where we got 12:09. Do you have any final questions?
Not at the moment. We can leave it open for a second. So
great. I don't think I had my email through here to do, so I'm just going to type out FELC geneticspt.com. So if for whatever reason you guys didn't get these slides, or if you just want to ask me a general broad-based question, feel free to shoot me an email here. Again, I can't answer specific information that's personalized to you because I'm not licensed to do that, and it'd be against the law.
Well, thank you so much for your time. We all really appreciate it. And there are a couple, there's one last question here is, can you touch on fees and penalties associated with opening an IRA?
Yeah, so that no fees in regards to opening an IRA. Now, say you have $1,000 in your IRA, you can take that $1,000 out of the IRA without any sort of penalty. You shouldn't, because you want that money to grow for you in the long term. Now, what you can't do is that you can't take out any interest that initial $1,000 made for you. You can't do that without incurring specific penalties and taxes on top of that.
And on the power of compound interest slide, when you mentioned how much we save per year of age, did you mean simply simply in a savings account, or put into a Roth IRA?
Yeah, okay. So again, this is a Roth IRA is not it's not an investment, it's an investment vehicle. So the way that they did this infographic is that they had this hypothetical person into a traditional target date fund. So the rate of return will actually, I know it's hard to see in the bottom, the rate of return will actually decrease as you get older. So they weren't trying to play funny with statistics, having a 10% rate of return as you like throughout all of these decades, because as we talked about earlier, the closer that you get to retirement, the more conservative your portfolio should be. So it starts at, I think what we have here, it starts at 10% rate of return, and then it dwindles down 1% each decade until it reaches a terminal interest rate of 5%. So a savings account, if you really look at it, sometimes it's not even 1%. A savings account is going to be usually less than 1%. So that's not a good investment. It's good to have a savings account because you want that money readily available just in case an emergency were to happen. But you don't want to have your emergency fund in your Roth IRA or in your 401k. You want that to be in an actual savings account. But don't look at that savings account as an actual investment. Look at it as a rainy day fund, a just in case type of thing. That's a good question.
And then 2 final questions here. Is there a time frame in which you will not be penalized for the Roth IRA interest withdrawal?
When you eventually reach the age of retirement, I believe 65. And actually, I think the age of 75, they actually force you to start taking out money because they need that. Go ahead.
And then the last 2 questions are kind of the same question. Thoughts on long-term care insurance, or is long-term care as a part of a retirement plan?
Yeah, that's going to be a highly personalized answer, and I would suggest that you talk to a licensed professional about that.
And that's all for now. Thank you so much for your time.
Cool. Yeah. Again, thank you guys for having me. My email is right through here. In case you need a copy of the slides or you have any sort of big picture questions, feel free to shoot me an email. Man, I really enjoy doing this. I'm very passionate about educating people about just the basics of personal finance, because the earlier that you get this information, the more advantageous it can be for you as you reach retirement. But thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you guys letting me come and chat with you guys.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good day, everybody.
You as well. Thanks.